Once again, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The first panel of our conference, Multiple Challenges for Europe, will be devoted to the future of the Eurozone. First, let me welcome all the panelists. Next to me is His Excellency Jan René Klompenhauer, who is an ambassador of Netherlands in Czech Republic. Next to him is Oldřich Dědek, who is a member of the board of Czech National Bank and also a former, for many years, lonely Mr. Eurozone of Czech Republic, who was preparing, was an envoy of Ministry of Finance for the Eurozone, which, as I wanted to say, was a kind of a lonely job. And next to him is Peter Balázs, who is the director of Center for European Neighborhood Studies in Hungary, but also long-time serving Hungarian diplomat and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary. And Benjamin Haddad is a research fellow in the Arts and Institute in the US. And Tomáš Puchy is an analyst in Friedrich August Hayek Foundation in Bratislava. So let me kick off the topic. It is clear that Eurozone should be somehow strengthened and reformed because during the financial crisis after 2009, it was quite clear that it's a project for a good weather, but not well equipped to a financial storm coming from outside. And so something should be done, but the question is what should be done, especially those who should, if I oversimplify it, like those who are supposed to finance this possible strengthening are not very much enthusiastic about it. Position of Czech Republic, for instance, of current government is that the Czech Republic should consider membership in the Eurozone after Eurozone reform itself, so it's very interesting if it's very vague, I must say, but it's also very interesting to find out like how it will reform itself successfully. So it is clear that there are what Eurozone is lacking, unlike other long-time functioning monetary unions. It doesn't have any common deposit insurance scheme yet, it doesn't have any common bond, it doesn't have any common budget, it doesn't have any finance minister, etc., etc. We should continue. It's relying on the rules and penalties for breaking the rules and on controls of fulfilling these rules, and it doesn't have enough resources of some mutualization or financial solidarity among countries. There were some recent proposals by the French president who clearly would like to have some substantial Eurozone budget, and but even European Commission, not speaking about Germany, is probably not considering, it is maybe considering some financial capacity, but it's not considering substantial substantial budget. But just to be just, there are also other proposals how to reform Eurozone. For instance, DP, German Liberal Party, which was about to be in the government, but as all we know, it failed. It sort of proposed to go back to the basics, so forbid any help among the countries, any saving of the bankrupted countries if some countries are bankrupted, and it even wanted to dismantle the European stabilization mechanism which was created during the financial crisis. So there are even other ideas what the reform should, how the reform should look like, which means like even like strengthening the rules and forbid any help. So it's I'm speaking too much, but I would like to hear from all the panelists like a starter. What is their position of the reform of the Eurozone and strengthening of the Eurozone according to them? So I would ask first His Excellency Dr. Messi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahacek. I'll try to be brief and also reflect, of course, the position of my country, notably our Minister of Finance, who made a speech in Berlin. And in fact, we can summarize the Dutch position in 3 C's. The first is commitment, the second one is concerns, the third one is conditions. First of all, we have a very good basis. In Europe, we have a shared history, we have shared values, we have constituted our nations on democratic principles, and all this is the basis for our cooperation. So this means we are 100% totally committed to Europe, to the European Union, and to the Eurozone, of which we are a founding member. And I'm proud that in 1986 I played a little role in that. But we also have concerns. The structure that we have built so carefully and deliberately requires attention and maintenance. I think you already referred to the financial crisis. And so we believe we have to think hard about how to make this system stronger, build it on a stronger basis. And we believe, first of all, that clear commitments were made at the beginning for the setup of the system. That needs only to be implemented. We made very clear rules about national budgets, deficits, and our debt levels. We agreed that deficits of governments should not exceed 3% of GDP. We also agreed that government debt must not exceed 60% of GDP. But reality is different. Just to give you one figure, the average government debt in the Eurozone this year will be close to 90% instead of 60%. But we recognize that some countries are struggling very hard to improve the situation, and we have full respect for it. But more work needs to be done to get this house in order, because these national budgets are the foundations of the whole Eurozone. And that's why I believe the Stability and Growth Pact that was agreed 25 years ago should be given, let's say, renewed vigor. This brings me also to the C for conditions. One of the lessons that we learned with the financial crisis is that the monetary union needs to be complemented with a banking union. You cannot have a monetary union only arranging, say, with paper money, but also the money created by banks needs to be regulated, and you need a banking union for that. So we are also committed to creating a banking union. But here again, we want to do it on the right conditions. The banking union is actually like a fire insurance policy, and if you all live in a stone house, but I live in a haystack, you will be less inclined to insure me, at least on the same basis as those living in stone house. So we need to make, the risks manageable. This means, in our view, that the banks themselves, first of all, need more bail-in buffers. They need to do something about the non-performing loans. And also they need to deal with the risk weighing of sovereign bonds on their bank balance sheets. Or in less diplomatic language, we have to break the incestuous relationship between governments and their national banks, which is very unsound from the financial point of view. And the second point, and this is where we also want to strengthen institutions, we need to convert the European Stability Mechanism in Luxembourg into a real European monetary fund. that can act more independently based on the stakes of the member states that they have in this stability mechanism. We also believe that investors should be first in line to help in case of a bailout. Because we should not have a system, or not continue a system, where we privatize profits and socialize the losses to be paid by the taxpayers. That is not a viable system. So those who, in full consciousness, took those risks have to pay when things go wrong. Finally, I should add that solidarity demands responsibility. It is not that we do not want to engage in stronger financial commitments, but we want to do that on a sound basis in which all countries take their responsibility. I think today this is a very topical subject when we look at the election results in some countries. So this basically, Mr. Chairman, is our contribution. Yes, we are prepared to more solidarity, but on the right conditions.
Thank you very much. I think it was a very clear position, and I would have a few more questions about it later in the second round, but now I would like to ask Mr. Derek for his opening speech.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me for this interesting event. I also want to be brief as Mr. Ambassador. Frankly speaking, as a Czech official, I'm always a little bit uneasy to speak or to recommend how the Eurozone should develop, because the state of debate in the Czech Republic is much more basic. Yes, we are debating, is it a Eurozone project? Is it the optimum currency area? Should we join? So we are still debating some of these basic issues, and therefore, are we entitled, yes, to recommend what the Eurozone should do when we don't have any, we are not members of the club. Of course, we comment initiatives of European Commissions. We will comment definitely the proposals of German and Franco proposals, yes, which will appear in June. But as I said, yes, the state of affairs, I think, in the Czech Republic is more basic. We can explain why, because from my point of view, I think that one of the reasons why the Eurozone survived such a severe crisis, and even though emerged in a larger composition, yes, equipped with the strengthened institutional infrastructure, is the belief of many economists and politicians that the single market, and we are, of course, we are strong supporters of single market as with freedoms, is inevitable, cannot function with a single currency. Yes, and I'm a little bit perplexed why economists don't understand this very economic relationship that without the single market, without the single currency, the single market cannot function properly. So this is one unknown. And another unknown, which many politicians also have difficulties to understand, is that functioning single market requires responsible policies. Yes, we should take for granted that Germans were allowed to create the single market under condition that the single currency will be as strong as Deutschmark. And this should be respected in order not to lose the attractiveness of the euro from the German public. And this is something which is debating in the Eurozone. I think I would also like to stress that despite many problems the Eurozone experience in recent years, the popularity of the single currencies are quite high. as it is demonstrated by regular surveys of Euro barometer. For me, one important proof of the strength of Euro is that even the populist parties, yes, in Western Europe are retreating, yes, from the proposals that we should abandon the Euro and return back to a single currency. Yes, the general people enjoy, I would say, the benefits of single currency, yes, traveling freely, yes, sending transactions, and so on. And my the last remark is I would like to share with you my experience. Mr. Ambassador already talked about completion of the banking union. Yes, in the week, yes, last week we had a meeting of the bank boards of the Czech National Bank and the National Bank of Slovakia. And one of the topic was to what extent the membership in the banking union changed the supervising practices in Slovakia. And it's not visible, yes, maybe on the surface, but the changes are really profound, as we understood. There is being the member of the banking union, being the member of single supervisory mechanism means much better access to information about the banking groups which have some business on the territory of the country. Being without, of course, we are a member of joint, how is it called, joint supervision committees. Yes. But Slovaks clearly see the difference, yes, to discuss directly and have a direct access to the information about the banking groups. Another strong benefit our Slovak colleagues mentioned to us that being the member of the banking union has a very sound effect on creating level playing field, as in regulatory environment, as in getting rid of different approaches of regulatory leniencies, yes, particularly in some countries, yes, to create these single standards. And last but not least, of course, it is a clear push to see the problems from the European perspective. As a typical example, for example, is the issue of non-performing loans. It is not the issue in Slovakia, it is not the issue in the Czech Republic as well, but it is an issue in some countries, and our Slovak colleagues are part of finding the solution to this problem. Even though from the purely national point of view, for them is some extra load in the work. But they feel, I think, more European in this respect to be attracted into solving this issue. So, my last point would be that as a result of Euro, because without the Euro probably there would be no banking union, then there is a convergence as to some common standards. I don't believe too much in the theory of optimum currency area, that different economic levels create problems for functioning the single currency. I think that the true reason of the divide between South and North we see is divergence in economic policies. That some governments, only by practicing the single currency in reality, suddenly realize that they cannot inflate the economy in order to get rid of some debt. Okay? They cannot use the exchange rate in order to create some artificial exchange rate cushion. And unfortunately, for many of them, it took time and painful reform as to realize this issue. I think the A classical example is Greece. From my point of view, I appreciate the Greek efforts. I think that Greece, before the crisis and today, are two different countries. So many reforms were adopted. Of course, it will take a lot of time to bring this effect, but for me as an economist, it's beyond my imagination, yes, to see the size of the adjustment from 12% of government budget to 3% surplus. Yes, no country would probably would achieve such outcome. And why? And my explanation is that even Greeks love stable currencies, as they don't like inflation currency, which is permanently depreciated. So that's why I strongly believe that the Euro project will be strengthened, as we will be actively involved in debating different proposals in this respect. From my point of view, my personal point of view is that I would like to see my country to be the member of the table, as when these issues are discussing. Of course, we have good friends in Slovakia. Yes, we are well informed. But being the member of the club which discusses this talk is a much better comparative advantage than the recipient of the measures that were decided in the official room. Okay, thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dědek. And now I would like to ask Peter Balaš for his opening speech.
Thank you very much. The Eurozone is not an end in itself. Of course, it has been perceived as a device, as a masterpiece of the single market to stimulate growth, to create jobs, and to facilitate the smooth functioning of the EU. Today, looking back, we know that it was a highly irresponsible enterprise. Based on a political dream, how nice it would be to have a common currency. It was similar to the concept of a constitution for Europe. Then, based on only 4 macroeconomic indicators, the Maastricht criteria, a central bank, and the power of the German economy. So this was the construction. And then, as Mr. Mahacek has told in his introduction, came bad weather. And we did what you should never do in private life, repairing the roof by stormy weather. But it was successful. The action plan signed by the 4 presidents, we remember the plan, the President of the European Parliament, Commission, European Council, and the European Central Bank, proved to be successful. And today we have a stabilized Eurozone, which has increased its importance, because today the Eurozone appears like a centerpiece of a selective and conditional EU development strategy. This is in the focus of the renewal or stabilization of the EU. However, last year we could see 2 competing concepts. One was the French, and the other one can be qualified as the German. The French came back with an old pet subject. I remember a time when President Chirac was promoting a very similar idea. Why don't we create a separate budget for the Eurozone, with a finance minister for the Eurozone, and with a parliament for the Eurozone? And then came the answer, obviously inspired by Germany, but transmitted by President Juncker, that instead of a budget, we have a budget line in the multi-annual financial framework. You don't need a minister because we have a commissioner dealing with financial issues, and you don't need a separate parliament because we have got the European Parliament. This was a very clear answer. And now in the draft new budget, we have some references clearly to the extensive interpretations of the Eurozone. I quote from the Commission paper. All member states are part of the economic and monetary union. All member states, never mind the opting outs or those on the waiting. All participate in the European semester. Euro is the currency of the European Union. So these are very clear messages that you are most welcome and please join Eurozone. And then two good ideas, two draft ideas. One is a new reform support program with 25 billion euros proposed by the Commission, including a reform delivery tool for, again, all EU members. In order to improve the markets, product market, labor market, capital market, education, tax system, and so on. And also a special convergence facility for those who are not yet in the Eurozone. However, that amount should be retransferred to the reform delivery tool if it is not used by those candidates before the end of 2023. And this is a very logical step, it's a very short deadline, because we should decide, Hungary and other members on the peripheries of the Eurozone, whether we take this bold step or not, because then we, including all the necessary phases, we would need 3-4 years at least in order to come as far as that. And there is another idea, the new European Investment Stability Function, again in the draft budget, in order to absorb large asymmetric macroeconomic shocks, learning from the past, with interest rate subsidy, with back-to-back loans, up to 30 billion euros. These are very serious proposals, which could perhaps counterbalance some problems. Let's hope that the Greek problem's solution is on the way. However, the 3 bailouts have absorbed a total amount of 326 billion euros so far, and that is still a public debt increase which is near to 320 billion euros last year. It was that amount. So these are very important amounts. But this is peanuts if you compare it to Italy. And we have an Italian government in the forming. Thanks God they dropped, for the moment, references to leaving the euro, because somehow in the air, and also dropped demands for the ECB to cancel 250 billion euros debt of Italy. But if Italy comes up with some of those ideas, it could shape the Eurozone again. And then behind the scene we have other risk factors, some new actions of US diplomacy, if we can call it diplomacy. Those to somewhat improvised individual issues which could create uncertainties, could increase the oil price, which is already increasing in the world. And then I don't like to imagine who would benefit from that increase, in what way, and how would it transform that world of uncertainty when the trade war is in the air, nuclear deals are questioned, the climate agreement has been questioned, so this is full with uncertainty. The Eurozone should be a stable basis for Europe, if possible.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to now ask Benjamin Adat from the university for his intro speech.
Thank you very much. I'll just say a few words, and I will try to give a political perspective, especially on the French perspective, and what I think today is the Franco-German political dynamic, and why I believe we're headed towards a clash between Macron and Merkel probably in the next few months about this. As you remember, so we're a year into Macron's presidency in France, and he has made Eurozone reform and integration a key pillar of his presidency. Actually, if you look at his political movement platform, En Marche, it was built, I would say, out of scratch on, I would say, three key pillars, which are market competitiveness in France, especially labor market reform, reform of the European Union, and integration of the European Union with a center on the Eurozone, and political renewal. And as it has been said already, this is not completely original in the French context. This is completely in sync with what has been the French approach to this issue almost from the start, which is the idea that the Eurozone should be more integrated, more tools should be at its disposal to make it a, what we call an optimal currency area, which is something that I think, a theory that the French elite do believe in, which is this idea that since 2011 we have mostly taken measures to control the damage of the initial crisis, but that structural reforms or austerity, whatever you want to call it, is not enough. Is not enough in the long term to provide the stability of the euro, and that we do need instruments of transfer and redistribution to prevent further asymmetric shocks. So we've heard this. We've heard these proposals that have been made by the French government, whether it is a economics minister of the Eurozone, a common budget to absorb asymmetric shock, and also to accompany structural reforms in member states, to guarantee deposits, to finish the banking union, and a few other proposals that I think are much more consensual, like the idea of creating a European monetary fund that would be based on the stability mechanism. The political strategy in the relation with Germany was basically the idea that France would start with structural reforms. And as you've seen, it was one of the first steps that President Macron took after his election, was to provide more flexibility to the famously rigid French labor market with 5 executive decrees just a month into his presidency, hoping that the first few months, the French election was 6 months before the German election, so that these 6 months would provide the momentum that once there was a new German government in place, this could be the moment to open a serious conversation about further Eurozone integration, rather than continue to kick the can down the road like we've been doing in the previous years. This is one of the reasons, by the way, why Macron gave his Sorbonne speech with his proposals for the European Union just a couple of days after the German election, which, to be honest, was a way to interfere in the coalition building and make sure that the question of Eurozone reform would be at the center of the coalition talks. And I think he expected that the current result, which is a grand coalition with the Social Democrats, who have a tendency to be more integrationist, in the German coalition would be a good step. However, I think what we're seeing right now among the French elite, even though it's not often said explicitly, but you see hints of this in recent speeches from French policymakers, is the realization that it's going to be much more complicated than initially hoped. That first, positions that were once ascribed to people like Schäuble in Germany are actually commonly held among the German elite. That Angela Merkel herself agrees with them, that they've realized that the current Scholz, the current German economics minister, is also very much attached to the idea that they should not be turned into a transfer union where Germany pays more than it receives. That the German political elite is still very attached to clearing, as we said earlier, clearing their legacy issues, making sure that banks get rid of bad performing loans, and I think we're going to enter a probably a more confrontational atmosphere within the Eurozone, especially within these two countries. One last hope, and I've heard this recently from French policymakers, is that the 2019 French economic budget will be more balanced, will seriously tackle issues of debt and deficit. And so once again, this will be seen as sending a clear message to the Germans that the French is taking structural reform seriously, and that now it's time for Germany to meet halfway. If you add to this the fact, obviously, the Italian election, the fact that other countries, especially northern countries in Europe, have signaled that they are skeptical too about this integration scheme, what we're seeing is it's going to be, I think, complicated to move ahead in that direction. And so I do think maybe not before the European elections because they will avoid this, but after 2019 we're going to head towards a more confrontational relationship that is, and you gave some diplomatic context, and I agree with this, I think you have to put it in a broader perspective of differences between the two countries, also on issues of defense and security, where the French, among others, are pushing for more integration and coordination on this as well. So I'll just stop here.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would like to now ask Tomáš, who is from Slovakia. So once again, the speaker was from a country which is a member of the Eurozone, and the last speaker will be also from a country which is a member of the Eurozone. So Tomáš, what are your reflections on it?
Good morning. First of all, I'm told that most of you speak Czech, so I figured it would be much more simpler to just switch to my native language. Začnem možno takým starším výrokom jednoho z otca eura, Otmara Issinga, ktorý varoval, že vytvoriť monetárnu úniu bez politickej únie je ako postaviť koč pred kone. A tieto slova sa preukázali presne počas zlého počasia, a to bolo presne počas finančnej a dlhovej krízy v eurozóne. Ako bolo povedané na začiatku, presne euro je, architektúra eurozóny je stavaná veľmi dobrého počasia, ale mala zásadný problém odolávať búrke. A teraz, ak si rozumieme, čo vlastne znamená, čo nás čaká ďalej v kontexte dobudovania eurozóny, tak samozrejme je tu dve roviny, a to je politická integrácia a to možno taká stránka ekonomického pragmatizmu. A ak by som začal možno otázkou ekonomickej integrácie, samozrejme sa potvrdilo, že je veľmi komplikované, síce nie nemožné, ale veľmi komplikované mať ekonomickú úniu bez únie politickej, tak monetárnu úniu bez únie politickej. No a presne počas krízy kvôli tomuto vznikol fenomén, ktorý sa označuje ako transferová únia. To je presne situácia, keď zodpovednejšie hospodáriace krajiny sú nútené zaťahovať účet za krajiny, ktoré hospodári menej zodpovedne. A než by boli nútené veľmi explicitne, ale skôr z obavy o to, aby neutrpeli sami ekonomické škody. Faktom totiž je, že či už máme politickú úniu alebo nemáme politickú úniu, tak naše ekonomiky a bankové systémy sú veľmi úzko prepletené. Samozrejme, ak sa bavíme o hlbšej integrácii, tak sú to kroky, ktoré sú na stole už dlhšie, ale nie je to nič nové, ale sú to zásadné kroky, ktorým smerujeme. A to je napríklad niečo ako spoločná garancia dlhu, ktorá proste vyžaduje, aby sa mohli ale spoľahnúť zároveň možno zodpovednejšie hospodáriace krajiny, že aj tie ostatné krajiny budú hospodáriť zodpovednejšie. A tu práve panuje tá veľká nedôvera, ten zásadný rozkol medzi severom a juhom Európy. Ďalej sa tu bavíme samozrejme o tých legacy costs, ktoré spočívajú v predošlých búmoch bankových v rámci niektorých krajín. A krajiny Grécko, či Taliansko alebo Španielsko sa stále potýkajú s veľkým objemom nesplácaných úverov, ktoré treba samozrejme vyriešiť ideálne ešte skôr, než sa podniknú nejaké ďalšie kroky. A v tomto bolo veľmi zásadným krokom začať začať budovať bankovú úniu, ktorá sa ukázala ako dobrý nápad, ale zároveň hneď zápäť sa ukázala ako politicky možno ťažko priechodný projekt. Paradoxne bolo to práve Nemecko, ktoré tlačilo na takúto reformu, ktorá mala zobrať časť dohľadu najmä nad systémom dôležitými bankami do rúk jednej autority. Zároveň sme sa následne dostali do veľmi praktické situácie v prípade Talianska, ktoré riešilo problém jednej zo svojich najväčších bank, ktorá skrátka mala a ešte stále má finančné problémy. A teraz možno, že riešenia bankovej únie budú spravodlivejšie, ušetria daňovým poplatníkom. Ak má banka problémy a má sa ozdravovať, najskôr sa má siahať na peniaze skrátka akcionárov a veriteľov banky, až následne na peniaze daňových poplatníkov, ako to naozaj nevyhnutné. V prípade Talianska sme sa však ocitli v komplikovanej situácii, keďže práve talianskí občania, väčšine dokonca dôchodcovia, ktorí si nakúpili cenné bankové cenné papiere a majú veľký úspor. A k tomu pridáme fakt, že talianskej ekonomiky sa nedarí až tak skvelé ako iným ekonomikám v Eurozóne a tiež rastúcemu populizmu a protieurópskym náladám. Teraz sme sa ocitli v situácii, keď hneď nové pravidlá sme sa museli naučiť trochu ohýbať. Samozrejme, paralelne s tým prebehla veľká otázka ohľadne Deutsche Bank, ktorá je dodnes jedna z veľmi problémových bank. Teraz otázka bola, či budú Nemci ochotní takýto pomerne brutálny ozdravný mechanizmus, ktorý sami pomáhajú pretlačiť, či sú ochotní aplikovať na svoju najväčšiu banku. V každom prípade banková únia nemôže správne fungovať, dokiaľ nebude pevne dobudovaná a jeden z týchto opatrení spoločná garancia bankových depozitov občanov. Samozrejme to forma poistky, je to tiež forma rozloženia rizika, ako sa musíme obávať v prípade Grécka, že sa minú jednotlivé prostriedky, keď sporiteľa zautočia na banky a budú mať potrebu si to peniaze vybrať. Na druhú stranu to spôsobuje pre malé a zodpovednejšie bankové systémy, ako príklad vediem ten slovenský, spôsobuje to problémy v tom, že budeme nútení kryť riziko, ktoré jednoducho vzniká v inej krajine. Bankových prostriedkov, bank, ktoré sú zodpovedné. Pre porovnanie slovenské banky si držia viac ako dvojnásobne veľký kapitálový bank, už aké je vôbec potrebné. Ďalšia vec v rámci transferovej únie je vyslovená na úrovni daňových poplatníkov a tu sa bavíme o Európskom stabilizačnom mechanizme, ktorý mnohí vnímajú skrátka ako peniaze, ktoré boli vyhodené celý projekt pomínum pri záchrane krajiny ako Grécko, ktorá sa môže javiť pomerne beznádejný prípad. Bohužiaľ, tento spôsob, akým bola táto kríza riešená na začiatku, a to primárne cez peniaze daných poplatníkov, veľmi nešťastný a vôbec spôsob, akým sa do toho dostali, je presne nedostatok minimálnej integrácie na úrovni koordinácie politik. Samozrejme, takže ak chceme sa baviť o tom, že budeme zachraňovať banky iných krajín alebo rozpočty iných krajín, je viac než fér baviť sa o možno, že spoločnej nejakej ekonomickej politike. A bez toho možno, že dokážeme fungovať, momentálne sme v takom medzikroku, ale faktom je, že toto riešenie nemusí byť udržateľné počas ťažkých čias. No a teraz, ak sa ale bavíme o tom, že samozrejme euro ako také je politickým projektom a eurozóna ako monetárna únia bez politickej únie vyžaduje vytvorenie niekoho hlbšie integrovaného celku, niečoho ako niektoré európske, Spojené štáty európske alebo Európska federácia. Na druhej strane nemali by sme sa dostať pri strášení možno nejakými takýmito veľkými konceptmi. Momentálne sme v bode, keď dobudovanie eurozóny, hľadiska inštitúcií, skrátka je otázkou ekonomického pragmatizmu. V tomto prípade čelíme klasickej finančnej trileme. Môžeme si vybrať medzi finančnou stabilitou, cezhranične pôsobiacimi bankami a národnými regulačnými politikami. A môžeme si vybrať iba dve z týchto vecí zároveň. A v rámci budovania spoločného trhu je pomerne nemysliteľné hrať sa na národných piesočkoch z hľadiska bankovej regulácie. Krásnym príkladom, ktorý vznikol počas krízy, bolo, keď jedna z najväčších talianských bank mala problémy s dostatkom kapitálu doma v Taliansku, ale napríklad aj pobočka v Nemecku mala kapitálu dostatok, no nemeckí regulátori napríklad neboli veľmi nadšení myšlienkou, že by tento kapitál mohli presunúť tam, kde ho je najviac treba. A to je opäť prvok, ktorý počas krízy prispel ešte viacej k neistote, ešte viacej vyžadoval inštitucionálne zásahy z hľadiska hlavne centrálnej banky. Samozrejme, euro ako také je integrálnou súčasťou spoločného európskeho trhu. Takže keď by sa o tom mali baviť aj v tomto kontexte, že chceme skutočne jednotný trh, bavíme sa o spoločných reguláciách a bavíme sa o spoločnej mene a bavíme sa skrátka o nejakej koordinácii politík. Tiež nesúhlasím s tým, že euro je mena, ktorá nie je vhodná pre niektoré krajiny. Faktom skrátka je, že niektoré krajiny si skrátka uvedomili, že nie sú ochotné robiť také opatrenia, ktoré by udržali verejné financie v zdravom stave pri obmedzeniach, ktoré euro prináša. Takže to je z mojej strany.
So I would have questions for every panelist now. Starting with the ambassador here, you basically said, which is, I could simplify it like it is being said that this is some kind of a Nordic position, also to the deposit insurance scheme or finishing of the banking union, is that first is all that these legacy issues, as it is called, should be dealt with by the national government themselves, and after banks are clean, then in the future, 10 years from now, perhaps we can implement this we can start this common system, this new system. So there is a Czech saying which is až naprší a uschle, which is like, when are you going to do? After it rains and dries again, which is basically this vicious circle, kind of means never. You know, will it, so the first question is like, will it ever happen, this situation that national governments will be able themselves, all of them, to clean their banking sector first from their own resources? And second question is, like you said, that the rules are the basis and the rules should be more vigorously implemented, like the master criteria or criteria of stability and growth, or whatever you call them. But everyone remembers that at the very beginning of the Eurozone, these rules were broken by the most important and powerful countries like Germany and France. So isn't it naive to expect that the rules will ever be rigorously respected?
Thank you very much for your question. Let me start with the most important question, which is the last one. We see a movement today by major European countries to respect those rules. And France, for the first time in 10 years, has a deficit below 3%. As was already mentioned by a colleague here at the table, France is taking measures to make the labour market more flexible. So we definitely see movement in that direction. Also, we have seen important change adjustment programs being carried out in the south of Europe, in Spain, Portugal, Greece. But there are some economies lagging behind. And there's more work to do. Those same countries also have a problem with banks. It's not that we advocate that they should help their banks more, rather the contrary. There's a too close relationship between the governments there and banks, because the governments there park their sovereign bonds. They force their banks to accept their sovereign bonds. This created this doom loop during the financial crisis between banking debts and sovereign debts, and then we have the Eurozone crisis because of this doom loop. So we need to break that. It means that banks themselves, private investors, the owners of banks, have to do the effort to make better balance sheets, you know, to deal with their non-performing loans, to create bail-in buffers. And then, indeed, at some point, we will have also a stronger European banking supervision to make sure that this all happens according to certain rules. And this will allow us then to have a common resolution mechanism for banks that fail. That we don't get this sort of contagion that we had during the financial crisis. And then, indeed, as a crown, as a jewel on the crown, there's the deficit insurance scheme. But you can only do that at the moment that you are dealing with relatively sound banks, which there has been progress with making banks more sound over the last 10 years, but we think more progress is still needed. We're very much committed to this plan for banking union. We think it can be done. It's not pie in the sky, it's not a political union, something very concrete. We can do it. And it needs, yes, political will, but also will on the side of the investors. The owners of the banks want to understand the rules of the game, and there's no easy bailout anymore.
Thank you very much. And I would like to ask Mr. Derek, what do you think about this idea that countries of Central Europe, or the countries which are still not members of the Eurozone, but it's our obligation to we didn't negotiate an exception, so it's our obligation to join the Eurozone. It just doesn't say when. But do you think it's possible to somehow negotiate for Czech Republic the new or a little bit different conditions, meaning that we don't want to participate on, if I mention legacy issues as far as the banking union is concerned, but legacy issues like to participate in solving the situation of Greece, or legacy issues of Italian banks or something. So once we seriously decide to sit at the table and to enter, do we have a chance, according to you, to say we don't want to participate on these old legacy issues?
The answer can be brief. It's up to politicians. Okay. Why not? Europe is full of irregularities. So if the Czech politicians and other may be so successful to negotiate this favor, okay, so it's the result of negotiations, so it should be respected. I would like, at my perspective, probably, yeah. I actually, we should, I think, take into account that the European stabilization mechanism is an instrument for increasing the stability of the Eurozone. And the Czech Republic is the consumer of this stability, even though it is not a member. Yes, it is the same, let's say, if some country wants to be a neutral country and is surrounded by countries which are all members of the NATO, for example. So I don't mind, yes, to be responsible for legacy because we enjoyed the benefit. It's a typical externality. Yes, we are consuming stability even though we did not pay. If the politicians are skillful enough to persuade that we should have such a benefit, okay, why not? But from my point of view, I don't think it should be a crucial point in negotiation. And by the way, of course, there are precedents. Okay, the Latvia joined, Lithuania has joined the Eurozone, and the European stabilization mechanism already granted some loan to Cyprus and to Spanish bank. And the Lithuanian government didn't raise this question. As today, Bulgaria is also interested in joining the Eurozone, and we don't see this kind of argument. So As I said, it's a matter of negotiations, but from my point of view, we are already consuming this stability.
One more short question on you. What do you think about this proposal? It was in a speech of European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, that the membership of the countries which are still not there, so we probably meant Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia, etc., that the Commission should somehow help these countries to speed up the process to get into the Eurozone quicker. But didn't we have it already in the EU that we were helped, not we, but the Eurozone was accepting very quickly some countries which probably shouldn't have been there yet, like Greece. So isn't it going to lead, if it happens, to the repetition of the mistakes which have been done in the past? Is it really important to speed up membership for certain? What's your opinion as an economist?
I understand the words of President Juncker that there should be some fund, for example, supporting structural reforms, because the membership criteria, Maastricht criteria, are about the discipline, and Bulgaria is fulfilling this criteria. Even the exchange rate criterion is fulfilled, but because from the formal point of view is not a member of ERM2, but the exchange rate is the same as this member. But from some structural points of view, yes, from the corruption and state of institutions, I understand the European institutions that the country should be also prepared in this structural form of view. And if there is any help, and if the country is interested in using these funds in order to improve their institutional structure, I think it's a benefit. I don't think that the Czech Republic would need this kind of assistance. Yes. I don't see any reasonable use. So, but it doesn't mean that some other countries, yes, which are less developed, that they may welcome this kind of assistance.
Okay, thank you very much. I would have a different question for Petr Balázs. That what do you think about it's again a political argument, but some people use it in public debate in the countries which are not members or somehow hesitating still, like Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, with the entry. So mainly people who oppose the membership, they say, look, this is a different, we are committed to membership, we didn't negotiate an exception, but this is a different Eurozone already. The Eurozone, we agreed in the entry negotiations to the EU to become members, didn't have these mechanisms like ESM, and the help to bankrupted countries, like which was organized for Greece, was basically forbidden as we understood it. So we can make a choice. They are not obligated anymore since the Eurozone is different. So what do you think about this argument?
I think this would be a rather poor argument because the obligation is of political nature and content. So whatever the Eurozone will be, whatever the single market will be, whatever the EU will be, we are a member and we are going to join. Anyhow, the Eurozone is steadily changing every day. And there can be some unexpected changes in the future. We are running after a train and would like to jump on that train sometimes. And that moment is decisive. That moment is extremely, maybe this is the most important element in the whole political approach, when and on what exchange rate. These are the most sensitive issues. What is the day And what would be the exchange rate? There is, of course, emerging nationalism in some countries, including Hungary, where the actual government, its predecessor with the same prime minister, misusing the two-thirds in the parliament, inserted a provision into the constitution, with the strength of two-thirds, that the currency of Hungary is the forint. That means that this provision can only be changed by two-thirds majority, whoever has that two-thirds majority. Of course, this is contrary to the obligation with the EU, but there is a signal, and at the same time they renewed the banknotes that are better quality banknotes. It costs a lot of money for a country to issue a new series of banknotes with additional security elements. So this is again a message. At the same time, I can share this vision that the euro is popular. People like the euro. The euro is easy to handle. It's so good to have euro in the pocket and then going from one euro country to the other euro country and paying with euro. Even in some countries, for instance, in Denmark, they accept euro in the shops without any problem, even if Denmark is not formally a euro country. So this is a positive and attractive thing. It would be good for the economy. It would be good for a lot of entrepreneurs who would like to see that. We make daily comparisons. What's the price of a cup of coffee in euro? What's the price of a Big Mac in euro? So these are the daily uses of that euro. It would be a good thing, but it would take at least 3-4 years for any government to go across that painful way of increasing requirements and come to ERM2 for 2 years and then jump into the Eurozone.
Thank you very much. Benjamin, you spoke mainly about Germany and France, but I would like you to also to touch the Italy. I have read somewhere a good sentence which said Italy is too big to fail, but it is also too big to be saved. Which I don't know exactly what it means, but it's a little bit absurd, but it also makes sense. So, what's your take on this?
I don't know. I think today it's the big unknown, and we're going to have to see how this coalition is built. There's still a lot of uncertainty. But clearly, you know, it's a new signal that. Last year, you know, in 2017, there was a lot of triumphalism in the European Union saying, oh, well, we did navigate the crisis, the euro crisis, the refugee crisis behind us. Actually, the United States is in a much worse situation than we are. It's much more chaotic, and now we're fine. Remember your first State of the Union address last year. And we realized that on issue from immigration and border control to the Eurozone crisis, or at least the question of sovereign debt, it's not completely behind us. I think one thing that is for sure is that it makes reform and further integration of the Eurozone even more complicated, and it will put more, it puts pressure on both France and Germany in this respect. It puts pressure on Germany because this Italian government will be, I think, very confrontational with Merkel over the question of sovereign debt, but it put pressure on France because it will make it a more complicated partner when it comes to reform. And the second question is, I think it will, discounting, by the way, the impact of foreign policy and sanctions in Russia, but I think it will even put more pressure on issues of border control coming to the June EU summit and isolate also the countries that want to sanction Eastern European countries on the question of refugee quotas.
Okay, thank you. But I have one more question on you. There is, it's considered among politicians maybe it's a taboo, any discussion on debt relief or forgiving debts, even though in the history it's, we can see that like every 50 or 70 years there is a major debt conference and debts are being forgiven. And even Germany was received debt relief like 3 times in the last 150 years, 2 times in the last century. And even in recent history, US provided a debt relief for Latin America through Brady bonds. And Poland got a debt relief after the end of communism, etc. So now we are in an upper part of the business cycle. So economies in the EU are doing quite well. But when there is a recession, again, this question might be again on the table. So somehow academic economists all say this is a question to be discussed sooner or later. Obviously, and I understand it, politicians must say like this will never happen. But so what's your take on this? Do you think that Europe is heading sooner or later to the debt conference?
Well, obviously you have the economics and the politics. And when Italy asked for debt relief, it's not the same thing as when Greece asked for debt relief. It might be unfortunate to say this, and this goes against the rules of equity within the European Union, but it's true that according to the way, the political weight of each country, you'll have different situations. I think, once again, it's very complicated to speculate on this because it clearly depends on what this coalition looks like, how stable it is, and how much it decides to put this issue at the forefront of its talks with other European countries. I mean, if I take another issue that I mentioned, it's not the first time that we see a country that is openly skeptical about sanctions on Russia, and yet the sanction regime on Russia has been stable these last few years. So, once again, I think it's a question of hierarchy of priorities. You were right to mention that Germany did get debt relief a few times over the 20th century, but this is not an argument that has resonated very well with the German political elite in the last few years, to say the least. And even if you take Greece, after a initially very confrontational atmosphere with the current party in power, you see Greece that did undertake structural reforms and is on the right path in this respect. So, I think it's very complicated to see where the relationship with Italy will go. I'm a little surprised to see that it's not more discussed right now within the European conversation, among European policymakers. But I think it's because everyone is suspended to what once this government will be formed, what it will actually say and decide to prioritize.
Thank you very much. So the question for Tomáš. I think it's like 5 years ago when, maybe even 6 years ago now, that when Slovakia was supposed to approve this aid package for Greece, it even led to the collapse of the government because there was so much opposition in it, that pensions and wages in Greece are much higher still than in Slovakia. So there was a lot of opposition among politicians and among people that Slovakia should finance this aid. What's the mood in Slovakia now as far as these things are concerned? And what's your opinion on this?
Ďakujem. Pamätám si túto situáciu veľmi živo. Jedna z najväčších koaličných strán bola odhodlaná za každú cenu nepodporiť takýto mechanizmus a bola to vtedy na Slovensku pomerne zásadná téma a naozaj kvôli tomuto padla slovenská vláda, ale ako sa ukázalo hneď v nasledujúcich predčasných voľbách, tak táto otázka nebola vo volebnej kampani nasledujúcej až taká zásadná ako samotný fakt, že jedna z koaličných strán položila vlastnú vládu. A to sa z hľadiska politického ukázalo ako o mnoho väčší problém ako to, že bol schválená a moc nepopulárna záchrana pre Grécko. No a túto tému v tom čase vlastne živila prevažne politická strana, ktorá následne tú vládu povalila. A dnešnou dobou táto téma vyprchala zo spoločenskej diskusie. Ona sa na čas vrátila počas problémov, ktoré malo Grécko naposledy, keď vyžadovalo tretí bailout. Faktom však je, že problematický bol najskôr EFSF mechanizmus, ktorý vyžadoval priame zhoršenie stavu verejných financií, keďže tam boli priame záväzky. Na druhú stranu, odkedy bol vybudovaný trvalý euroval, teda ESM, ktorý je koncipovaný skrátka skrz garancie. Faktom je, že Slovensko a iné krajiny zatiaľ nezažili nejaké zásadné náklady do záchranu Grécka. Otázka samozrejme je, že z dlhodobého hľadiska, či Grécko bude schopné dodržiavať nejakú rozumnú úroveň hospodárenia, či bude schopné to splácať. Vyzerá to pomerne neuveriteľne, ak sa pozrieme na čísla, naozaj dlh Grécka aj po tretej záchrane sa pohybuje okolo 270% HDP zhruba. Na druhú stranu, ale ak sa pozrieme na architektúru tej záchrany, za prvé Gréci dostali na niekoľko prvých rokov, na dekádu odpustené vlastne splátky úrokov z tohto dlhu a splátky boli rozložené tak ďaleko do budúcnosti, že posledné sú momentálne naplánované na druhú polovicu tohto storočia. Čo to dosť dlhá doba, to znamená, že grécke verejné financie splácenie tohto dlhu zásadne neťaží. Ale samozrejme tá druhá zásadná vec, ktorá prebehla, o ktorej sa už toľko nehovorí, keď sa hovorilo o tej prvej záchrane, grécka vláda, vlastne všetky, ktoré sa museli potýkať s týmto problémom, boli nútené zaviesť veľmi zásadné opatrenia, ktorými zlepšili stav svojej ekonomiky a ktorými ušetrili zásadné finančné prostriedky vo verejných financiách. No teraz, keď sa premietnem späť, možno nejaké 2 alebo 3 roky to bolo, tak slovenský minister financií mal také ostré vyjadrenia na margo gréckej vlády, dával Slovensku ako krásny príklad odpovedného hospodárenia. No a ak sa pozrieme na dnešnú situáciu, tak je to práve grécka vláda, ktorá zodpovednejšie hospodári ako tá slovenská. Takže grécka vláda má verejné financie v prebytku, kdežto slovenské sú stále v deficite. Ak pozrieme historicky, problém týchto záchran samozrejme spočíva v tom, že je to pomerne šok, pretože v našej čerstvej pamäti je stabilné obdobie, kedy nič takéto nebolo potrebné. Ale ak sa pozrieme na históriu Grécka, ktoré bolo záchranné dokopy myslím, že 8 krát a prvýkrát ešte predtým, než táto krajina vôbec vznikla v modernej podobe. Tieto situácie sa cyklicky skrátka opakujú, nie je to len problém jednej krajiny. Takže je to niečo nové pre nás, no ale čo by som namiesto tohto, čo sa udialo v Grécku, samozrejme je to dôležitý politický cyklus. Všetko išlo fajn, opatrenia pokračovali, boli úspešné, boli zásadné. Potom prišla nová vláda, ktorá slúbila, že zásadne prehodnotí tieto opatrenia, potom začali nové problémy. No takže banková únia ako jedno z opatrení, ktoré samozrejme boli dôležité aj z hľadiska Grécka, položila na to aj presne jeden začarovaný kruh. To znamená prepojenosť bankových dlhov a bankových problémov s problémom verejných financií. Na druhej strane v procese záchrany, ako sme videli pri samotnom Grécku, ale momentálne aj v Taliansku, sme si vytvorili ďalší začarovaný kruh. A to sú slabé pravidlá, alebo nevymáhané pravidlá, ktoré vedú niektoré krajiny k menej zodpovednému hospodáreniu, pretože logicky musíme sa pozerať na to aj veľmi realisticky. Politici v každej krajine skrátka majú za cieľ svoje aktuálne volebné obdobie. To znamená, že tieto veci sa stávajú a nemusíme sa baviť o typických problémových krajinách, môžeme sa baviť o akejkoľvek krajine v Eurozóne. A samozrejme dlhodobo nezodpovedné hospodárenie, na ktoré Únia nemá páky, vedie v istom bode až k potrebe záchrany, pretože naše ekonomiky sú prepletené, aj bankové systémy sú prepletené, ak nechceme, aby sa táto nákaza rozšírila ďalej, tak je s tým treba niečo podniknúť. No a ako sa ukázalo v ďalšej fáze, tak to, čo pomohlo najviac počas krízy, bola Európska centrálna banka, konkrétne záväzok Maria Draghiho, keď povedal, že urobí čokoľvek bude treba, aby zachránil euro. A tento krok mal za cieľ v prvom rade odbremeniť krajiny, ktoré dostali pod tlak a vytvoriť im priestor na to, aby robili opatrenia. Ale čo sme videli, bolo veľmi znepokojivé, pretože tieto krajiny, ktoré neboli priamo súčasťou, nedostali sa do záchranného programu Eurovalu, kde boli nútené vyslovene robiť nejaké opatrenia. A tie ďalšie krajiny skrátka využili tento priestor na to, aby spomalili svoje snaženie. Že na jednej strane vytvárame potrebu nejakej záchrany a pomoci, na strane druhej práve toto vytvára priestor na to, aby sa tie opatrenia nerobili. Takže z tohto hľadiska celkového je tak nutné posilniť minimálne pravidlá kontrolu.
So first question here, I would ask everyone who is going to ask a question to introduce himself and say on which of the panelists is the question heading. So,
yeah, thank you. Philip Long from Res Publica in England. I want to ask a distributional question because, as I said yesterday, we now know from the OECD that inequality intra-countries is greater than inequality between countries. So what interests me are what are the distributional effects of the euro? And can you see any positive outcomes in respect of inequality that can be delivered by the current currency union? And what I'm talking about in particular is the trade imbalances within the Eurozone. And trade imbalances are what really lies behind the financial crisis. And internal within Europe, we have them as well. And it can't be the case, which in fact Germany is now insisting upon, that all countries move to surplus, because we know that in order for some countries to be in surplus, other countries have to be in deficit. This is economics 101, but clearly not yet understood in Berlin. So what worries me is that we still have these massive trade imbalances between the North and the South. There's no sense that this can be solved within the euro as presently constituted. So my question really is to the panel is, are we just going to see more of the same? Are we going to see more of the failed language of you two must be like Germany, in which case we will see more elections like in Italy? Or is there some mechanism within the conventional institutions to genuinely tackle this problem? Or are you going to try and, is it just going to be theorized away, in which case the problem won't be tackled and populism will continue to rise?
Okay, thank you very much. Who wants to respond?
Thank you. This was a very complex question. So let me try to approach it from my own mindset. Yes, inequality is increasing, and populist content is increasing. And one major factor has been the financial crisis. If you look at the figures of income distribution, the top 1%, who are they? People in the financial sector, apart from IT, it's the financial sector. And I think for the United States, I don't have the figures for Europe, top 1% earns 25% of American GDP. And owns, I think, 35% of the assets. So, and that was not the case in the past. So other people are suffering. And the same applies to Europe. So in my thinking, the major contribution we can make to avoiding the excesses of the past is by having this banking union. Put a good supervision on the banks and avoid a situation where the banks blow up our whole economic system again. The financial sector has to be proportional to the real economy. To my mind, it's not a question of trade surpluses, of trade, because that can be cancelled out by other capital movements, on the capital account. It's very much the banking sector. The other challenge is, of course, the digital economy. We all want the digital economy to grow, but it's not paying any taxes. And a bigger share of GDP is generated in the digital economy, so we have competition here. This is being debated also in the EU, how to tackle this. My own country has changed its approach. We're very much against the digital pool tax, but we're moving towards accepting of some form of taxing also the digital. So that's my answer. Do the banking union and tax the digital. That will make income distribution better and deal with part of it.
Yes, I agree with you that it's a conundrum. Is it possible that every country is a surplus? I also believe, yes, before the crisis, that the current account deficits do not matter in the Eurozone, and that all these issues should be solved on the microeconomic level. But the crisis taught us that the sudden stops may happen, yes, in another crisis. And one of the response was the creation of surveillance of macroeconomic imbalances. And you know that Germany is also criticized for excessive surplus. Yes. The question is it Germany really so good in structural reform, or is the reason of large current account surpluses the consequence of too tight fiscal policies? Yes. So this is permanently debated. So the views are different. The Commission tries to seize it. I think it understands it may be the problem, and at the same time, the key reason should be stress should be on structural reforms. The classical example is, I think, is Italy. The problem of disturbing growth is the lack of structural reforms, as to cumbersome the labor markets, as the problems to compete with other, let's say, emerging markets in traditional products. This is, I think, maybe some kind of solution. Yes, but I agree with you. Yes, it's not easy. Yes, by definition, it's nonsense. Yes, that everybody is a surplus. Yes, but if it is within the reasonable limits, yes, maybe we will see.
You don't have to. Well, let's take more questions. Okay.
Good morning, Ivo Kaplan, Evropský institut renesanci, European Institute Renaissance. Please, I have a question more or less to the ambassador of Netherlands, because his country made some anti-German preparation of the accord on the European level on the economic union. We know that this project is already from the very time, so it's almost 30 years of economic and monetary union. We spoke about, or you spoke, or panelists about the future of the Eurozone, but no one spoke about economic union, which is the next step of this Eurozone. So I like to know, maybe also from other panelists, what they think about this new treaty between Germany and France, which will be signed or prepared at least 2 days before the next European Council, which is on the 21st of June.
So we would collect one more question, so Mr. Minister, and we will have to wrap it up in 5 minutes.
I'm a professor of Charles University and so on and so on. My question is for, I agree that a number of those steps after a couple of change mechanisms changed certain behavior. Yeah? Even in those countries which are called gypsy chips or pigs or whatever. So if you go to Ireland, you know, so I remember in the 90s, we were asked, I was one team of the privatization of mutualization of one bank, they were asked to sell it only to the Irish. Incredible, not anymore. Yeah. So there is a clear change in Ireland, in Spain, in Portugal. If you go to Italy, there is absolutely different, not only now, the new divergence, it always was the case. For example, former Commissioner Monti, when we discussed the issue of the deposit insurance, questioned the position of Italian government for years, saying we have the very best national deposit insurance, which was never applied, never applied. Always the lender of the last resort intervened. If you see not only the steps of the last government, it was previous government which asked to avoid this resolution, bank resolution system. So my question is there any big difference vis-a-vis the rest? So the behavior of number of those former southern countries changed, except of Italy, to my understanding. And whatever the behavior of Mr. Draghi, who is supporting by huge assets further situation in conjunction, in upper cycle. So that's,
I think it's clear. I feel a little bit sorry for Italians that there's no Italian here to speak so much about them without anyone being present. So, so first question was that
Yes, thank you, Mr. Kaplan, for your question. Clarify that we in the Netherlands, we very much appreciate and applaud Franco-German reconciliation. And without Franco-German reconciliation, where would we be? We wouldn't have Europe. It's very simple. So, if there is to be a new Élysée Treaty to strengthen Franco-German friendship, I think we will be, very positive about this. Another question is, the management of, the economic system in Europe. That is a question which is, we need to be responsible to all our parliaments about this, not only in the Netherlands, but also in the Nordic countries. And, we have our views on what is sound economic policies, what are policies that promote growth and competitiveness. And we also have our views on what is, bad economic governance. So, yes, that is what shapes our attitude. But, the Franco-German reconciliation is very good. Absolutely.
so who wants to speak a bit about Italians, Peter or Benjamin?
Maybe Peter.
Well, I think I have referred to the Italian case that it is estimated to be 10 times bigger than the Greek problem, economy, in terms of size and gravity. Much depends on the incoming government. If the political construction looks very similar to the Greek one, an extreme right and extreme left party are forming coalition. They haven't given any name for the Prime Minister, person of the Prime Minister. We can guess, of course, there are some well-known cases. But this is another risk factor. Some people believe that with the Brexit, it would be much easier to forge unity within the Eurozone, because with the British leaving the EU, that periphery outside the Eurozone is shrinking. It is practically a northeastern periphery where two countries are dominating, Poland and Sweden, for different reasons, as non-Euro countries. The others are more or less negligible from the viewpoint of the future functioning of the Eurozone. And then comes this Italian problem with all the risks it involves. And with all the external risk factors in the world, the Middle East turmoil now with Iran and now the new troubles around Israel, the Russian expansionism, the very difficult predictability of US diplomatic steps and many others. So I think this is an increased risk factor. And of course, one of your former questions, what Eurozone are we going to join one day? Nobody really knows, but if the hardcore is strong enough, and I also referred to some very promising draft proposals, which could really reinforce the Eurozone. So I'm a little bit optimistic.
So I would like to thank all the panelists. We have to finish, and we're going to start a VIP talk on migration very soon, with no break. Thank you all the panelists, thank you all of you for listening, and we will start in a minute a VIP talk on migration. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let me start the next session, which will be much shorter. We call it a VIP talk, and there will be one more VIP talk in between the panels at the afternoon. And this VIP talk, as you can see from the materials, is devoted to the migration. When we spoke about the Eurozone in the last panel, I mentioned that not only myself that that Eurozone is a project for a good weather, but not for a storm. Maybe it can be also said about the migration issues, that Schengen system and Dublin system were projected for a good weather, but maybe for some little rain, but not for a storm. So our two panelists will present a position of very different countries in this respect. Czech Republic has almost no illegal migrants coming from Syria through the Balkan route. But on the other hand, it's actually not true that we are a country of like one race, one nation, whatever. We are a normal European country in this respect. Actually, we have hundreds of thousands of people living here permanently or temporarily, but being registered from different countries, and our per capita number of foreigners permanently living here per capita is actually higher than in France. So we are not a country of one nation and one color of skin, or whatever you can call it. But on the other hand, we represent the position which really emphasizes the stronger protection of outer borders of the EU, etc. And we are obviously, not obviously, but as everyone knows here, we are refusing these mandatory quotas and reallocation mechanism, etc. That's why we can welcome here Paolo Novotná and Mr. Ambassador Eftimiades, for not saying it first, is representing Greece here, and Greece is a country which is on the front line. All the refugees from Syria and other countries were trying to enter, are still entering the European Union through Greece. It's a country which is a country of sea and ports, and it's traditionally more open to migrants coming from the sea, but it also demands, and it is not surprising, more pan-European solidarity as far as the migration is concerned. So I would like to ask both of the panelists to present their introductory talk, and we will start with Pavla. So, Pavla.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the possibility to speak here on this subject. And I guess migration became a challenge in the last years in Europe, and became a huge political symbol and symbol for political discussions throughout Europe. Let me start with one, I think, good information that not everybody here in the Czech Republic knows. The number of migrants, asylum seekers or illegal migrants, depends, coming or crossing the external borders of the EU dropped to the numbers of 2012. In 2012, I don't remember we would have had the discussions we have now. It was not on the level of the leaders' agenda or not that big. So it was possible as well thanks to a lot of achievements of a lot of member states and of a lot of EU activities to drop the numbers. However, to be frank, the situation is not solved and is still very fragile. And I think we speak a lot about that. That's why it was discussed and it was decided that we need a reform. And here I believe the EU really needs a reform of the whole system. Unfortunately, the discussion somehow became a discussion on Dublin 4, as if Dublin 4 would be kind of a cornerstone or the key to a reform, which is not true. And coming now to the challenges Europe faces, I would start with the goal, because we need a goal if we want to overcome challenges. And this goal, we think, came 2016 during the Bratislava summit of the European Council, informal European Council in Bratislava. But that there was a decision, or in the Council conclusions, that we should not repeat the situation of 2015 in Europe. This is kind of now the motto and the goal. There we all agree in Europe. Where we do not agree is what measures we should take to achieve this goal. And as I said, a lot is being discussed about Dublin and quotas and all this, but if we want to achieve really this goal, we need a complete change of a system, complex system, robust system that we need to change. And this system encompasses not only asylum policy, which is only one part of it, but as well border protection, external border protection, Schengen, free movement, returns and readmissions as being one of the most discussed part in the last years, the visa policy, the EU external policy, humanitarian and development aid policy, solidarity and crisis mechanism as an important part of the discussion, security, and last but not least, financing. So the question, who will pay it and how we will pay it, all these changes. We are sometimes being labeled as the country that is against mandatory quotas. So, which means that is against an EU solution, against something that would help, against solidarity, which is not true. We do have the position of being against mandatory quotas, but we have never neglected discussion about solidarity mechanism. And from the beginning, from 2014, when the discussion became more and more important, we were trying to be very active in many aspects of the solutions for the migration crisis. I don't want to go to all of the details of our contributions because I would say even at some point we're one of the most active countries from the new members of the EU. In external dimension, in sending our officers to hotspots, in bilateral help, in sending police officers where it was necessary. So this, I feel, is important to say. Unfortunately, mandatory quotas and Dublin became not, as I said, it's not the cornerstone of the change, but it's a political symbol of the change, and became a political symbol of the discussions. The situation now, as it stands, and we have been saying that since 2014, it's not. It's kind of changing. 2015, we had a huge discussion on quotas on refugees. So, meaning we should have solidarity with people who are coming to the European Union, being refugees. So, people who are under the Geneva Convention, who are real, genuine refugees. Let's call it. It's not a technical term. What we face now. The problem of 2018 is not this. We have a huge problem because quite a big part of people who are crossing external Schengen border of the EU would never get a refugee status in Europe. So we basically do not face a problem of solidarity with refugees, but solidarity with returns. Because these people should be returned according to EU rules. And this is a completely different subject. And I think we all agree, just when we look at it, it has no sense to send people around Europe to perform return. This is kind of unlogical, and this is what we are now saying. And I know there are countries, of course, who have different, we see it very differently. Let me finish with one thing. All I mentioned is very interconnected and interdependent, of course. So if we do one thing and not the other, it will not help. But what we feel here, and maybe here in the Czech Republic, we feel even more. In 2015, we lost trust. We lost public trust that we are able to manage the situation. And I believe that we have seen uncontrolled secondary movements around Europe, and we have not had any idea who the people are. So this, from the point of security, is very crucial. This needs to be changed for sure, and it's already started. Against the goal that was set that we should not repeat 2015, I think we should, or what we need to do now is to renew public trust into the whole system. If we are not able to secure security in Europe, then we will fail with the whole system as such, and it might even be that the system, which is for genuine refugees, might fall apart, which is, I think, not the goal. So, back to what many years ago we called the area of freedom, justice and security. We have to renew this area of freedom, justice and security. This is very important. So, like, again, control who is coming, under which condition, and then, of course, be able to perform return as quickly as possible to help the people who have the real right to stay on the territory of the European Union, meaning genuine refugees. Thank you.
Thank you, Pablo, and thank you, Jan. I've been ambassador of Greece in the Czech Republic for the past couple of years, and one of the previous functions I had in my life was I was part of the Greek enlargement team back in the early 2000s, negotiating then the enlargement of the European Union. So in the eyes of my foreign ministry, I'm partly responsible for the countries, including the Czech Republic, now, let's say, expressing their views on migration against Greece as well. But definitely I have to register that I'm very happy for the great cooperation I've had with the Ministry of Interior here, and specifically with Pablo Novotná. Let me say that it's very appropriate that we tackle the issue of, as Jan put it, migration after the issue of euro and prosperity in the European Union. Prosperity needs definitely security. And in a union of shared sovereignty, I would add that we also need the notions of partnership, solidarity, and above all, we need clear rules. Why we need clear rules? We need clear rules because only with that we will have effective implementation. Let me clear up some notions before that. We talked generally about migration, although the subject in question is asylum. Migration still remains a national responsibility in the European Union. The European policy is regarding asylum. So I think it's very important in our minds to distinguish those two notions. And we're talking about asylum, we're talking only about to what kind of persons we will recognize international protection. And that is the questioning point right here. In the whole area, of course, that we will be probably discussing right now, except for migration, asylum, we will also, of course, discuss about the Schengen area. Greece, being a frontline country, has been addressing the issue, let's say, of flows of asylum seekers, specifically at the peak of 2015, when, let's say, the issue of European solidarity became headlines. What we did back in 2015, how we fixed up the crisis right then. Let's say on the eastern frontier, we managed to have the cooperation of Turkey with the EU-Turkey agreement, which is holding up right now. Is that a permanent fix? No, I would say that definitely is not a permanent fix. Why not? Because first of all, the flows have not really stopped. 2018, I won't mention number, but we've seen a significant increase in comparison to other years. Pablo says that, let's say, we have, let's say, around the external borders, let's say, a much better situation. Let's say at our borders, definitely not. And you know, this is also affecting public opinion in Greece, and definitely public opinion on the islands that are hosting such big numbers, let's say, way beyond their capacity. Number two, the return mechanism embedded in the agreement didn't function. Why it didn't function? It didn't function because of, let's say, other parties invoking technical questions. There was I won't go into details, but there was a geographical limitation. Refugees should stay on the island. That has actually created problems with the capacity. Second, Turkey has consistently invoked public order in the persons to be returned. So just a very small, let's say, chunk of those people went back. Number three, now we're also facing some legal questions. From October 2017, the EU-Turkey readmission agreement came into force. and then, let's say, Turkey has connected the application of the agreement with the visa liberalization regime that requests from the EU. So basically that's the situation on the Eastern Front. Now, we agreed in the European Union we need to review our, let's say, common asylum policy, what we call the Dublin system. We are discussing Dublin 4. And definitely, I'm very much aware of the public opinion concerns here regarding relocation. But consider it as a friendly remark when I say that this is a detail regarding the whole architecture of the system. Let's say when we discuss about how we will manage asylum, we'll have to see how the whole structure of the system will work. And what do I mean about that? First of all, it's important what kind of signals we will give to the outside world. We definitely have some countries, because of their geographical location, being frontline countries. And, you know, we have an experience on that. We've done that, I wouldn't say for years, I would say for centuries. And, you know, if we haven't done that well, we wouldn't be having that discussion right here, right now, by the way. I would say that, first of all, we need a clear system without complex rules and untenable administrative deadlines. And that's what current proposals actually impose on the frontline states. Secondly, we wouldn't put all the responsibility, all the administrative burden and follow up only on the frontline states. I mean, even if we were a state with the, let's say, administration, even of Germany or France, we wouldn't be able to do that. And thirdly, why we need the solidarity. We need the solidarity in emergency cases to also show to the outside world that the situation will not only be left to member states on the periphery, on the external borders. Now, we feel that the way the discussion is being actually developed in the European Union right now, the balance is tilting more on preserving, let's say, political priorities and not promoting a sound system of common asylum policy. We feel that still there is the danger that in the next crisis, the frontline states will be left to their own devices. On top of the problems that I mentioned, there is the time bomb of the return policy. We have piled up persons that need to be returned, and the experience up till now has shown that the current return system on a nation-to-nation basis, Greece, let's say, versus, I don't know, Libya or Pakistan or Italy versus I don't know what, it really doesn't work. And we know that. And we've been very, let's say, vocal on asking that we need to basically reform the return system. We need a common European backup on the return system. Definitely, we had, let's say, some very good developments with the European Border and Coast Guard. We definitely had, let's say, some very positive experience on bilateral cooperation with other EU member states, including the Czech Republic. But I would say again, and don't get me wrong, that these details do not actually make up for the lack of an architecturally sound asylum system. Now, on migration, and I would stop there before the discussion. We need also to have in mind that there is the negotiations on the Global Compact on migration in New York going on, and we need to be very, let's say, careful how, what kind of provisions these will have, and as, let's say, U2 NT8, or I think now it's 27, we need to be, let's say, very clear to other partners in the world what our priorities is and how our common voice actually is being projected. And I will actually end up on this positive note. It's very important, whatever our internal, let's say, differences are, to project a common voice and to have a common understanding on how the system works, what kind of rules we adopt, rules that are clear and functional. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will have a question on Pavla briefly. So it seems to me, I'm not an expert obviously, that the decrease with the migration is connected first with the outer issue, with the situation in the countries which are the source of the migration. But then there is something which we can call improvisation, because the deal between the EU and Turkey is basically, we can call it an improvisation. Also, there are also inner reasons in Turkey that their labor market is also overheated and they need their Syrians to stay there. There are many other issues. There is this supposedly, according to the press, excellent Italian interior minister which really had successes in Libya, negotiating there with Arabs, etc., etc. But can we somehow go on with these improvisations and have the levels on the 2012 level? So, or do we really need something more like a robust functioning system?
What we have been speaking about in the EU-Turkey agreement and as well other discussions how we deal with certain countries. On one hand, we need, of course, the negotiations with other countries. On the other hand, we need to do as well our homework and do the changes on our side, because if that's interconnected, as I said. We can have perfect agreements with third countries. If we don't have it solved at home, then they will not work. And this is something Mr. Ambassador said about the administrative burden and about the length of the procedures and all this. This needs to be changed, I guess, if we want to be really effective. Because return is not only that there is a third country that needs to be able to receive the people, but we have to be able to send the people as well. And this sometimes is not that working. We are in the EU discussing for the last 20 years a concept of third countries, of safe third countries and safe countries of origin. Some of you might know. This is a headache, but nowadays it's becoming more and more visible that we need this concept, and we are getting kind of farther with this. So this would be the legal concept of the homework that we need to do.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Ambassador, you said that I was actually about to ask before your speech that if you would agree in Greece that there is more responsibilities in protecting your borders organized through the European Union, through Frontex, and what your politicians would say about it, which it would really means that's kind of your sovereignty is being protected by EU forces. But as I realize that it's not that important anymore, for you would need more European approach from sending people back who don't have the right for migration. Could you be more specific? How would you see this pan-European organizing of sending back people? How would it technically look like, or how it would you ask for some new European force creation which would organize it, or you would need someone who would negotiate on your behalf, or you need more money and resources to do it? Obviously, Greece is not a strong enough partner to speak with such big countries like Pakistan, if I understand well, etc. So, could you be more specific on this?
Definitely. Thank you. First of all, to say that on the issue of the external borders, I think even let's say if we had more, more staff to do that, actually coming from other EU countries, the same rules of engagement would apply. So of course, definitely that would be a great help. But the same rules would apply regarding, let's say, how we engage with boats of refugees coming to our shores. I mean, we will apply the same rules as till now. That's one thing. The other thing, of course, is, and I think that also has to do with the European, let's say, external policy, how we all approach, let's say, how diplomacy approaches, let's say, the relations, let's say, towards countries involved in a certain region, and helps, let's say, alleviate tensions and bring about, let's say, a better climate of cooperation, and that creates also a better atmosphere also in the flows of people. On our part, let's say, we've been very forthcoming in implementing the EU-Turkey agreement, because we actually believe that Greece and the EU, we needed a functional relationship with such an important neighbor like Turkey, and we definitely believe in that. Now, you mentioned the issue of returns. Yes, we've had, let's say, numerous examples that countries on, let's say, on a country-to-country basis do not comply with their obligations. So a bigger player like the EU, if it were the EU to take over, to back up such a return system, would have, let's say, better carrots, stronger carrots and sticks for these countries. These countries would no longer have to make, let's say, their bids and play one member state against the other. This is, I think, we've seen that in a number of policies, not only on asylum.
Okay, thank you very much. So, yeah, do you have any questions? If you could introduce yourself, I just would repeat a little.
Thank you. Ivo Kosacik, Professor of European Integration here at Charles University. Two questions. Firstly, we are not operating only with the European asylum system. There is international regime of asylum law, which start to be considered to be more and more obsolete, designed after war for different situations than today. And it also creates constraints for policy options which both EU and member states have. So my first question would be, do you think it's time for the EU as an international law abiding but also influential actor of international law to open debate on general reform of the international asylum law, so alleviate constraints the European Union has in the policy options in setting 21st century style asylum policy? And the second question is, again, we mentioned several times, the return issue. We have, again, this time not international law, but European law, quite strict principle in the return directive, legalize or return, which of course creates a huge gap between reality and formal rules, the legitimizing whole system. So again, it was mentioned we need a reform, but in which way, in your opinion? In the form of less rigid rule, legalize, return, or else, or in putting more pressure both on EU states and or non-EU partners to respect these principles, for instance, strictly political, financial, media pressure on the non-EU countries and EU countries to enforce this return policy, even if it is politically problematic, including the, again, open-ended question of non-refoulement principle. Thank you.
Is it working? Is it working? Yes. Good. All right. Very difficult questions. Number one, international regime. It's the Geneva Convention. I don't know if it's really necessary to change the Geneva Convention. Even so, and the truth is, it's being a little bit discussed, kind of whether it's not the problem, how we could further deal with it. The problem is what came to the Geneva Convention, how bigger and bigger the whole system became. Because if you would go strictly only through the Geneva Convention and strictly to the UNHCR rules that were bound with the Geneva Convention, we could work with that. It's possible. There's a lot of that was added to the Geneva Convention later on through the jurisdiction of courts. So if you would go back and really think what was really on with the Geneva Convention, then it would be maybe quite important. On return directive, Czech Republic is one of the countries that for many, many years wants on the EU to open the return directive. To open it because it needs to be reformed and changed. It needs to bring less rigid rules, and this we might get into conflict with a lot of stakeholders. It needs to be able to use more limiting of movement of people in detention. Because unfortunately, and experts throughout the EU, experts on return who have to deal with return will tell you, without detention, effective return is almost impossible. In an area where you have no border, no internal borders. So this is, I know it's very delicate, and I know it's kind of needs to be taken into account. And in many documents in the last 2015, when we said detention is an important part, we were like crucified. Okay, no, never. Nowadays, in the many Commission documents, actually in all Commission documents in this area, action plan, return, and all this, you have detention as well as an important part of the whole system. We might not like it, but from the expert point of view, it's just not possible to neglect this discussion. And pressure on the other state, and the ambassadors said it very clear, it needs to be the whole EU, and it needs to be a pressure. And the pressure can be political, can be diplomatic, can be financial. There are options for that, and we have had last year a very good example when we used pressure to one country, and it helped a lot. And we used pressure in the visa policy. And now the European Commission came with the new visa codex, and the most important part, or most discussed part of the visa codex code is Article 25, which is article that says that visa leverages and visa sanction can be used together with readmission. So this will be a very important part.
Just very quickly, basically to say that the European Union actually does need to open the whole international asylum system. Actually, the negotiations on the global asylum compact, as I understand, are going very well. I think the new Dublin system is the right place where we can give, let's say, to the outside world the right messages. I think on the return, I've been, let's say, very clear about what the Greek priorities are.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. I wanted to collect a few questions, but unfortunately they are already over time. So there is a lunch now. So for those who want to discuss it, like with the panelists, they can in the corridors and during the lunch, perhaps. And we have 45 minutes on lunch for only. So I will see you at the next panel, which starts at 1 o'clock. Okay, so thanks.